Hi, welcome to our silly little vlogs about Agent Carter Season 2. I'm Slider, and I'm joined by my partner in crime, Agent Mangalova.
Hi.
So, before we talk about the new season that just aired, the first two episodes, we should probably go over what we think of the first season as a whole. I'll start first because I'm pretty sure I have a lot less to say about it.
I'll just get out all of the incoherent squealing of joy while you're doing that.
Yeah. So, I really enjoyed the first season. Probably not as much as manga, but I did really enjoy it. Thought, a lot of the characters were just very fun to watch. And I really, really love the setting. The cool, 40s police and detectives sort of thing. All the cool retro music and jazz and such. Just the style of it is just one of the coolest things ever. That style will never get old. Literally anything that uses it is usually pretty awesome. And Agent Carter herself is just a fantastic character. Just completely badass, completely owns every scene she's in. Just super compelling to watch, both as an action star and just as a character.
Yeah, I mean, it's set up your classics. It's a spy drama. It's set up with a lot of, the tropes and setting of a spy drama. But instead of following, your standard James Bond ripoff, it's Peggy Carter. And she's specifically dealing with the kind of guys who became spies and think they're James Bond. Even though none of them are a fraction as good at their job as she is, but...
That's because they're too busy being normals.
They're too busy being mere mortals instead of being Peggy Carter.
Yes. And of course there's Howard Stark, or let's be honest, Howard Hughes. He's literally Howard Hughes.
Yeah, it's not subtle.
They literally call him Howard. Seriously. Who's basically spends half the series not being there just to piss off Peggy. By not being there.
He manages to create a huge mess and then just kind of sidle off and vanish while other people clean it up.
Though he did risk his life to try to fix it, at least. And by risk his life, I mean be hypnotized.
Yeah. Stuff with him got surprisingly emotional. I will say I really enjoyed the friendship between him and Peggy through season 1.
Yeah.
Because he's the kind of person that he's maybe one of the last characters you'd expect to be so respectful of a female agent. Because, he is that playboy, just sleeping with 100 different women every week, that kind of character. But he somehow manages to make that so it doesn't mean he can't have the utmost respect for Peggy and what she's capable of and what she can do.
3-dimensional.
Holy shit. Yeah, it makes him more that he's very straightforward than anything else. A lot of the people he's dealing with have very shallow motives for dealing with him, so he deals with them in a very shallow fashion. But Peggy is after the respect that she's earned, and he gives it to her because she has earned it. And also I think it's because she's one of the few people who doesn't deal with him in a shallow fashion. Aside from anything else, she primarily sees him as one of the best technological minds in the US at that time. Mainly just annoyed with him when he's not using his incredible technological skill for powers of good and so on. But that does mean he can actually talk to her seriously, and she takes it seriously just the same as he takes her seriously.
Seriously.
Very serious. Most serious.
Indeed.
But, it's some surprisingly emotional bonding moments between them towards the latter part of the season, especially talking about Steve. I'm jumping directly on bisexual Howard Stark headcanons, the heterosexuals don't get to keep him. He was to be fair, everyone was a little in love with Steve Rogers, but the way he talks about him to Peggy, sounds like he was in love with him the same way Peggy was in love with him, so...
Does that mean in Captain America 3, he's gonna visit Howard in the hospital?
Howard's dead.
I remembered that halfway through when I was talking. Maybe he'll do it anyway.
Steve doesn't need to worry about Howard. He's getting his boyfriend back in Civil War.
Well, protecting him from, never mind.
I have faith in the Russos that they'll do Civil War well. There's a lot of people been ragging on the setup of Tony claiming a friendship that wasn't really there, but this is a whole other conversation. I'm just gonna say I have faith in the Russos.
To be fair, based on Avengers 2, it isn't like Iron Man hasn't made mistakes before.
Avengers 2 is also a whole other conversation. But no, we're talking about Agent Carter right now and how it's incredibly good. And,
yes.
I enjoyed the show, especially because Peggy is not, there's a lot of shows and movies with the idea of, a strong female character, particularly a female warrior that can hold up with the guys, will be one who's still very skinny and petite and fights with, elaborate martial arts styles, or is very skilled with weapons, but doesn't have a lot of physical strength on her own. Because it's playing into that stereotype that women are automatically physically weaker than men, so if they want to hold up in a fight, they gotta have, insane kung fu skills or something. But Peggy, she gets a lot of good fights in the series, and a lot of them are brute force fights. That's also something I loved about Mad Max Fury Road. But it's like people have pointed out that Peggy's fighting style, half of it consists of grabbing the closest thing to hand and hitting her opponent with it till they stay down. She whacks people on the head with staplers, with bits of her oven, just straight up kicking and punching, and taking kicks and punches. She's not being instantly knocked down by a single blow. She's getting some quite severe, full-blooded kicks, punches, headbutts, and she's just taking it and sucking it up and fighting on, because she's physically very tough. I love that they've always avoided that and avoided that kind of, making her look weak in her fighting style. She's a trained agent. She has a lot of physical strength. Have you just stepped back to let me talk now?
Surprisingly, I don't think we talked much about, Jarvis yet.
No, I haven't. I enjoy him too. I enjoy finally getting to meet the guy behind, the Jarvis system. The guy who puts up with Howard Stark all his life.
Yeah.
And Peggy's friendship is wonderful. They're just, the first season primarily, they build their friendship on just being very Englishly exasperated at all the Americans around them. And that continues into season 2, which we're going to get to, but we're talking season 1 right now. They're just being incredibly English and exasperated at everything. But again, he is immediately deferring to her the trust which she deserves, which, probably makes sense, him coming from a British military background. It was a thing that, at the time the US joined the Second World War, Britain had already been fighting the war for a few years, and British women had been a huge part of the war effort for years. And, there were pamphlets that were distributed to British and American soldiers about, cultural differences and dealing with each other. The American pamphlet included the glorious line, "The British can't make a good cup of coffee, but it's alright because you can't make a good cup of tea." But it also had a whole section on dealing with, the female members of the British Army, reminding American soldiers, when you see a British woman with an Air Force ribbon, she didn't get it for knitting more socks than anyone else in Ipswich. There were women flying the planes, there were women operating the ground defenses, repairing and maintaining most of the machinery and weapons, building most of the weapons. So, by that point in the war, British soldiers had basically learned that their female counterparts were there, they were as good as them. That was more normalized at that point. American soldiers were just getting to know that.
That is one of the best parts of season 1. That entire, the whole scene with the army, that stuff was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Just going into the base.
Yeah. Just especially when she meets that soldier who's is like, what's the accent, Queen Victoria? And he's being creepy and flirty, and just all she does is sucker punch him, and it's glorious. So, because, she probably, she's clearly served time in the British military, and she would have been getting she would have been used to a bit more respect from those soldiers than she was getting from the American soldiers. And, Edwin Jarvis, having been in the British, did it say Army or Air Force?
I don't quite remember.
Well, he would have been used to working with women in the military as well, so I think it makes sense that he quite easily... And also he does have a lot of respect for Howard Stark. Like, he's more aware of anyone else what a weird person Howard Stark can be. But he also knows that he's, a genius who's really trying to do the best he can with what he can do. And, the whole thing with Jarvis and Anna is lovely, and the fact that Howard just immediately stepped in to help them. It's no wonder Jarvis is undyingly loyal for that.
Okay, so before we actually go into the first episode of Season 2, I think we should address, I suppose, the elephant in the room. And I think you'll agree the thing that has annoyed me the most so far? No Angie.
I know, where's Angie? It's, like, did a producer, somebody freak out that the fact that Season 1 ended on Angie and Peggy moving in together? It's like, oh god, too much gal pals, no homo, send her off to the West Coast and give her more male love interests.
Huh.
Like, there still seems to be things going on in New York, especially now that Dottie's presumably on the loose. I don't believe for a second that the FBI can contain her, if she's not been taken away by secret Hydra agents. Like, I'm presuming those sinister old white men in suits are Hydra. I mean, old white men in suits are inherently sinister. But,
of course.
I'm presuming they're Hydra or some shit, and Dottie's on the loose again. So if stuff's going on over there, I'm hoping Angie will show up again, either as Peggy's, East Coast informant. Is New York on the East Coast? I don't know about geography. Okay, East Coast informant, or if Peggy has to go back to New York and we see Angie again. I hope... I don't know why Angie's completely disappeared for these episodes, and it is frustrating. But I think it's also been, fairly well made up for with the rise and prominence of some other female characters and, the new ones who've been introduced.
Yeah. Speaking of which, the first episode, The Lady in the Lake. Pretty big intro.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Just the fact, beginning of the season, it's Dottie cosplaying as Peggy because she has taken her murder crush to a whole other level.
Yes.
Peggy doesn't exactly seem impressed, but it does, go straight into a lovely brawl between Peggy and Dottie, and again, it's not your sexy movie woman cat fight. These women are kicking the living shit out of each other.
Yes, they do.
And it involves, Peggy taking rolls of coins to punch Dottie with.
That was my favorite part, when she knocks her out with the coins, and it's just slow motion with coins just falling.
It's... there better be at least 5 videos somewhere where people have put What You Say on.
Yeah.
I have lost faith in the internet if people haven't already done that.
And they did just put some Cash Money raps on over it. That'd be great.
Making it rain.
Making it rain. That was the best way to start.
Great take of that iconic outfit and just Peggy directly addressing the hat in particular.
Yeah.
And then just... Oh, those early scenes between Peggy and Dottie. Dottie is so thirsty for Peggy. It's insane.
Yes.
It's like, if they were told to remove Angie because things were getting too gay, they clearly took their revenge with Dottie because, oh my god.
Yeah. I believe the term is foyer.
Foyer, yes. There was insane. Which, again, is almost kind of playing off on the amount of that. Like, again, it's almost a reference to some James Bond movies. And the amount of that Bond has infamously had with certain antagonists.
Yeah.
And that's getting played with Peggy and her active evil doppelganger, like deliberately making herself as much of an evil doppelganger as she possibly can.
Yeah. I also really like how she tries to deal with Dottie in the interrogation room. It's pretty much, when you think about it, it's kind of the equivalent of Macaulay Culkin, Home Alone. I'm not afraid anymore.
Well, the thing is, I think it's really interesting that Thompson later echoes the I'm not afraid of you line when he's trying to interrogate Dottie. Like, first he gives her this whole routine, carrot and stick routine, which she's actually visibly getting, at one point she looks like she's almost on the edge of intimidated, but then she visibly gets more confidence the second he starts imitating Peggy. Because she can immediately tell that this guy is not Peggy. Peggy uncuffs Dottie, and Dottie doesn't try anything because she's already very aware by this point after several fights with Peggy that if she tries any flipping the table or any other shit, Peggy will kick her ass. So she respects and is legitimately concerned. I don't know if necessarily afraid, but she definitely knows she's probably not going to win a fight with Peggy Carter. So she has to hold back a little more. Whereas with Thompson, she's not afraid of that man at all. He tries imitating Peggy, and it doesn't work because he's never kicked Dottie's ass. She immediately flips the table and beats the shit out of him,
Yeah, that didn't end so well.
I have a lot of thoughts about Thompson in general in these episodes, and a lot of the way that he personifies quite the good way that the show is handling sexism. Because it's allowed to be a bit more in your face about people being sexist because it's set in the 40s, So it's allowed to be more in your face, but at the same time, there's so much shit that these guys do that guys still do these days.
I'm mostly amused that his name is Jack Thompson, because I can never not imagine that he's trying to stop video game violence now.
He does seem like the kind of guy that, he'll probably be a crotchety old man by the time video games become a thing.
Yes, exactly.
He spends these episodes, on the one hand, he's seen Peggy in action. He's seen Peggy in action with the Howling Commandos, who also openly respect her. I love that episode in season 1 for that, by the way. He knows her skill and he does value her for it, but he visibly hates that he respects her, and he hates visibly respecting her in front of any other men. 'Cause this guy has such a complex. He's so clearly emasculated by Peggy being better than him at everything. So, on the one hand, he knows he needs to use such a skilled agent, but he hates doing it in front of other men. So, he takes his first possible opportunity to boot her across the country, which I hate this, by the way. Not just the fact that he sends Peggy away, even though he must know that she is making leaps and strides with Dottie that no one else can, but the fact that he specifically plays on her desire to be acknowledged. She states at the end of the last season she doesn't need anybody else's approval, but she craves it. She doesn't need it, but she wants it very badly. So the second all he's told is he needs to send someone out west. But he specifically tells Peggy that she's been asked for personally by Sousa, which, whether or not you ship them, you have to acknowledge that he's shown a lot more respect for her than anyone else from day one, and she values his approval very highly. So, I'm pissed off at Thompson for being a dick and playing on her need for approval like that to get rid of her. Which, of course, immediately things go bad with Dottie and the FBI the second Peggy's gone. Of course.
Of course. Jack Thompson ruined everything. That is the moral of the story.
Basically.
So, then she ends up in LA and ends up meeting with, Jarvis, who is mostly, really, really bored and desperate for adventure now.
I know. Oh, I think it's kind of precious how keen he is to get into any spy business or fight or anything all through these episodes. He's visibly constraining his excitement. Also, just the fact from the second they're reunited, they're being so English at LA.
Yeah. I love Jarvis questioning the structural integrity of palm trees and how he's offended by avocados.
Just the foliage is preposterous. I love that line.
Foliage is preposterous.
Just, the fact that they're instantly like, I have to admit that I imagine you're puzzled. I am indeed puzzled. Is it the flamingo? It is indeed the flamingo.
Why is there a flamingo?
Because Howard Stark. Oh, I have to say, I love Peggy's responses to being introduced to Howard's car later on.
That's also fantastic.
Just being somewhat appalled by all the... And just the end of it when she accidentally hits the switch that flat...
It just goes flied.
Good lord! And her response is, good lord, is that a mirror? Oh god, Howard. Oh my god. A lot like her response to his wardrobe full of costumes in season 1. She's just, what is this? And then she finds useful disguises, and she's like, oh, okay.
So this is, honest question, because you would probably remember more than me. Was season 1 this wacky? Because this season gets pretty goofy at points.
It was at certain points. It's, there were a lot of stuff with Angela. I loved a lot of the sequences when Peggy's just moved into that, women's boarding house. There's a lot of sequences with the other women that are very goofy. Especially the one where she's, the women are discussing all the different ways they steal food. Like, one of them's got a special jumper that she can hide a whole chicken under. Another one's got a gravy pot in her handbag. And especially because then Dottie's into that. She's like, can you make one of those for pickles? And I just imagine her making, now trying to steal this special American technology for her spy gear. It's like, can I make one that hides a gun?
I think it would be a lot funnier if she literally was just interested in stealing pickles. Just like, I just really like pickles.
Like, she's an independent agent now. She can have all the pickles she wants.
So, to get a little more into the plot of the first episode here, everyone is called into LA because they found this girl frozen in ice, pretty much, on this, and even the lake is kind of frozen, it seems.
Yeah, she's got her body is showing the traits, the signatures of a serial killer who vanished a couple years before, and yeah, there's magic ice in the lake in one of the hottest days of summer, and it's 1947, so Elsa's nowhere to be seen.
And also, this frozen woman apparently glows in the dark.
Yeah, and then a coroner tries to operate on her, gets turned to ice himself and shattered, which is quite unpleasant.
That's the other goofy thing about this. There are 2 times in this episode where someone gets shattered into, just dies of being shattered into a million pieces, and it immediately cuts. Just immediately.
Yeah, and it's on the one hand, it's horrible, but it's also just such an absurd way to die.
No, I just love that. It's just well, someone died. Next thing. Oh well.
Moving right along. Not even the weirdest way people die in this universe.
I'm kind of glad that they kind of ended that, they figured out this murder fairly quickly, in the sense that, part of it was, the whole serial killer thing was just what the detective in charge, I believe, stabbed the body just to make sure that the case could continue.
Yeah, he switched the shoes and things like that,
I love that too.
He was the only one who knew. So, yeah, just so he could do that.
That's just the most childish thing. Just having a serial killer just switch shoes. Now your shoes are on the wrong feet. Also you're dead or something.
Serial killers are not renowned for their rational responses to things. I honestly wasn't paying that much attention to this guy's motives, because I was just... it segues quite well into what looks like the overarching plot of the season is whatever's going on with Zero Matter and whatever supervillain Whitney Foster's going to turn out to be. Some people are quite excited about it and have already recognized who she's going to be. Someone with a mask or something. I'm not familiar enough with the comics to talk.
So yeah, that's the last part of this episode, which introduces the Isodyne Energy Corporation, headed by Calvin Chadwick, who bizarrely is the name I remember most so far this season.
See, his name kept flying out of my head. I was just thinking of him as, potential senator, and then senator husband as his wife rose to prominence as a character in episode 2. And for some reason, I cannot keep the science love interest name in my head. The first scene he was in...
I think his name is Wilkes.
Wilkes, yes, because the first scene he was in, I missed it, so in my notes I just had him down as Science Wine. And then that got stuck in my head, so I kept forgetting his name every time it came up, because I was just thinking of him as Science Wine.
That was probably one of the best parts, is when he talks about how the victim and Calvin were very close. And he has the best quote, by that I mean they were involved. And Peg's like, yes, I understand. And then just a pause. Sleeping together. Your point is made.
Yeah, I don't know if he just genuinely didn't think she didn't get it because he couldn't read her responses or what, but just the fact that he felt the need to be increasingly obvious.
That's probably the best note I have for this episode. Everyone is weird today.
Well, if he's been trying out a lot of his own science wine, I just love that, the fact that he was apparently scientifically optimizing wine in there. I have no idea what his job is meant to be there, but he was scientifically optimizing wine, so, clearly making important contributions to the human race.
Yeah. And so by the end of the episode, we find out the doctor was contaminated, and so he just shattered, and then find out that the detective who was in charge of this case has also been infected, and they try to go after him. He like kidnaps Wilkes, I believe, to try to find some sort of cure. But then an officer shoots him. He's saying that he didn't hear them on the radio, but then you find out at the end that Calvin Chadwick actually pretty much paid him off. But that's when you find out that the wife is way smarter than she initially let on.
Yeah, no, she was playing a bit of the, like, she wasn't playing dumb or anything at the races, but she was just kind of being, happy and friendly and I've got an acting career, So I think especially in that time and place, that's something that a lot of people would have, blonde actress, in that time and place, I think a lot of people would have conflated that with dumb very easily. So she was, completely overlooked till the end of the episode.
Which I'm sure that has never happened ever again.
Well, especially throughout season 2, you realize that she's much smarter and much more dangerous than her husband.
Yes. And then we go, after all that, into episode 2, A View in the Dark. And I think at this point I'll just quickly go through the more story-related notes, like the more important things happen in this episode. First of all, Calvin Chadwick has a secret meeting behind a bookshelf. Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Just the most cliched, obviously. It's just...
They're rich old white men who masterminded the Wall Street crash. They couldn't possibly be more cliched if they were all stroking white cats.
Yes, it was great. By the way, is it safe to put out candles that way? Just put your fingers on it.
Well, it is a way of putting out candles. You need to do it quick. Like, you don't press your fingers to it, you just lick them and just tap it really quick. You're not really supposed to hold on to it.
I think I'd be terrified of just...
I generally don't do that, because I'm very good at setting my fingers on fire. I just blow the candle out, but it looked like it had some kind of ritual thing. I don't know, maybe they think they look like more manly men if they put out fire with their fingers, I don't know.
They desperately just want to be a really, really cool secret organization.
Basically.
Look at how evil we are, guys!
Supervillains.
Like actual supervillains are just roll their eyes at them, and so they desperately want to look like the cool kids.
I just imagine Red Skull walking in and going, "Yes, but can you do this?" and rips his own face off. That's how you're supervillain. Yeah, at this point, they're trying so hard to be sinister, and they're so clichédly sinister that I'm not taking them seriously as threats yet.
No.
Genuinely, the biggest threats are still Dottie, who, again, I'm convinced is already on the loose by now, and Chadwick's wife, because whatever's going on with her by the end of episode 2 cannot end well for anybody.
Yeah, so, Carter eventually is able to actually get, a warrant on Isodine, but they conveniently have a radiation leak, and no one buys it.
No, not for a second.
Yeah, quick scene of Dr. Wilkes, sneaking into the place, trying to find some things. It's kind of interesting that I wrote that down, thinking about it. That scene should be important, but it lasts for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm
just looking at my notes for this episode, but yeah. I'm just gonna...
a lot of things happen, but there's just so many scenes I just can't bother to write down every single story thing that happened, so I just try to write down what seems important. Eventually, Wilkes is able to finally invite Carter to the bar, and is somehow able to get Carter basically explains her life story off screen, it seems.
I think so, I think she's just gone to... I want to know that full anecdote, by the way. I want to know why things ended up with her carrying her headmaster's wife's best underwear and his brandy.
I don't know.
Especially, he starts that scene with his chin very heavily in his hand, to the extent that he looks like he's bored by this story, which I can't even conceive of, given how it ends. I want the rest of this story. But, it sounds like she just got into this silly story some way.
Yeah, and once they take her to... Where do they go after that? I don't think it's the Isodine lab itself, but it is some sort of...
Well, no, they dance for a bit, and then they go up to this observatory he used to work at, and he tells her a bit of his life story.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of breaking out of being poverty because worked at, the orange fields or something.
From the orange groves, oranges grow in orchards, not fields, on trees. But, yeah.
Why did I say fields?
And there is a bit of discussion of, racial prejudice as it applies to his career trajectory, which I feel like that's one of the things that she bonds with him over, and I feel this kind of echoes with the fact that one of the things that fosters her friendship with Susan the first season is the fact that he's also on the receiving end of a lot of prejudice from their co-workers, in his case because of his disability.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, it wasn't until that scene that I remembered that he was a black guy who was actually successful in, like, the 40s. So I was like, huh. Because,
he mentions, how he really wants to clean Dizodine because it was the only place willing to offer him, an actual job of merit that wasn't cleaning floors. I will say the show is still granting him a lot of concessions. I don't think in 1947 he could have got away with, flirting with Peggy in front of a white cop. I mean, black people can barely get away with anything in front of white cops these days. Never mind 1947. I think he would not have felt safe flirting with a white woman in front of cops, even if she does look like Hayley Atwell. I mean, who doesn't want to flirt with Hayley Atwell? But, so the show is still giving him a lot of concessions for the sake of modern sensibilities, but it's also not shying away from discussing the way racial prejudice is affecting his life. And again, they're allowed to be what might be considered heavy-handed about it because it's the 40s, but so much of it is still resident with today, more than a lot of people want to admit.
Yeah, absolutely.